Hey guys, today we will be learning about for loops. For loops are an incredibly useful method in Java that allows you to repeat code a certain amount of times. They are not to be confused with a similar type of loop, the while loop, which is used when we don't know how many times we want to repeat a loop. There are many examples with for loops. For example, in Conway's Game of Life, for loops are used to check for neighbors around a living or dead cell. Here's the project we will be working on today. We are going to be creating a very basic for loop. We will have a variable outside the loop, which we will name base. We will now set this equal to 2. We want to design the for loop to bring the number 2, which is our variable base, to a certain power. Before we start this project, we need to understand the anatomy of a for loop and how they work. The for loop consists of 3 main parts. Here is an example of a correctly written for loop. The first part of the for loop creates a variable that is only used in that specific for loop. We have set this as an int and named it I. This variable can be changed to any number depending on how many times you want to repeat the for loop. The next part of the for loop is a condition. This will tell the for loop when to stop looping. In this example, the for loop will stop once a condition evaluates as false. So in this case, if I reaches 5, the condition reads 5 is smaller than 5, which is false, and thus ends the loop. The last part of the for loop defines how the variable will reach its condition. In this case, we have set it as I++, which means it will add 1 to the variable I every time the for loop performs one loop. This will allow I to reach the point where the condition evaluates as false in order for the loop to stop. In this example, the for loop will start with the variable I equal to 0. The first time the loop runs, it simply runs all the code that has been written inside the loop. Once the code has finished, the for loop loops back to the beginning and basically reads over the conditions. The first thing it does is it runs what is written in the third part of the for loop. In this example, it says I++, so 1 is added to the variable I. Now, it reads the variable. Since 1 has been added to I is equal to 1. Once it reads the variable, it checks to see if the condition still evaluates as true. Since 1 is smaller than 5, the condition evaluates as true and runs the code one more time. Once the code has been run one more time, it goes back and reads over the conditions again. It continuously does this until I eventually reaches 5, which is when the code stops and does not run again. Now that we understand the basics of how a for loop works, we put this new knowledge to the test by creating our project. We're going to create a for loop that brings the number 2 to a certain power. Let's start by creating the 3 parts of the for loop. We can name the variable to whatever is most useful, but in this case we will name it power, since it is essentially the power that the number 2 is being brought up to. For our project, I want to set 2 to the power of 8. So I will set the variable power equal to 8. Now comes my condition. I will set my condition to stop the loop once a variable power reaches 1. The loop will stop once a condition power greater than 1 evaluates as false. Now comes the third part, which defines how the variable will reach the point where the condition evaluates as false. We want the variable to be equal to or less than 1, and it is currently at 8, so we will subtract 1 from the variable every time the for loop completes a loop. We will write that as power minus minus. Finally comes a code that actually modifies our initial variable base, which is 2. Whatever is written here is up to you, since there may be multiple ways to write a code that brings a number to a power. I wrote a code that multiplies the base by 2 every time the for loop loops. We run the code and it works. The output is 256, which is 2 to the power of 8. Now you may be thinking, why did we set the condition as power is greater than 1? Why didn't we make the condition power is greater than 0, so it'll run 8 times? Well, if you look at the step-by-step diagram of how the for loop runs, it'll be much clearer. As you can see, the first loop contains the variables base, which is equal to 2, and power, which is equal to 8. Our code tells us to multiply the base by 2, and so now the base is equal to 4. Now 1 is subtracted from the power. This runs again and again until it eventually reaches the answer of 256, which is after the 7th loop. We wanted to stop right there. As you can see, the variable power is equal to 2 at the 7th loop. If we want to make the loop stop, we can make the condition power is greater than 1. Now in the 8th loop, the variable power is equal to 1, which means the condition is now evaluated as false, because 1 is not greater than 1. The loop stops and does not run the code, giving us a correct answer and preventing it from multiplying by 2 an extra time. You can change the variable power to any number that you want. We can set it to 20 and it'll give us the answer to 2 to the power of 20. Congratulations! You made your first for loop. Now you can practice and expand on this knowledge to create amazing things. Thank you for watching and good luck.